بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا افتح لنا أبواب رحمتك وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما وتقوى وثبت أقدامنا. أما بعد. So we wanted to focus now on chapter 2, which is entitled, Are You Getting Married for the Right Reason? This is the 5th session of the marriage course that's being offered by North Hudson Islamic Educational Center as a way to prepare youth and those who want to get married who may not necessarily be youth, whatever their backgrounds, whether they were single, with experience or no experience, divorced, widowed, or other type of scenarios. There's some things that we wanted to rework in the book. The book starts off with quoting a hadith from Bukhari and Muslim. A woman is normally sought as a wife for her wealth, beauty, nobility, or her piety. But choose her piety and you will choose the characteristic of piety, you will prosper. I rearranged the translation a little bit. I wanted to focus on the whole idea of psychologically, what is it that we should be looking for in a marriage? Because a lot of times what we're doing is that we are looking for wealth or beauty or a person's family background or a person's religiosity. We're looking at that aspect as a reason why to marry. But then on a more personal level, meaning at a more emotional level, meaning at a level of motivation and intention, we're really not clear why we're marrying. There are some things that I felt that could have been done better in this chapter, to be honest. And that's why I'm trying to add some ideas that are necessary, because what we want to be clear about is that when we're going into a marriage, what we're doing is we're going into a relationship with another human being. And we're going into a relationship with a human being that's tied to other relationships, friendships and families. Family from the mother's side of that person and from the father's side of that person. And so there are a lot of things that we're dealing with when we go into a marriage. We're not just marrying an individual and that's it. We're not just marrying someone because of their wealth or because of their beauty, because of their family background, because of their deen, and that's it, whether male or female. We're marrying a person in which they may have wealth, they may come from a notable family, they may have deen, they may have beauty, but then at the same time, we have to live with that person. And living with a person is not just living with their wealth and their beauty or their, because they come from a particular family or because they have deen. There's emotions involved. And in what today's time we call background, right? Some like to say baggage. I personally don't like the term. But there's people's experiences, in other words, that they bring to the relationship. The book, it talks about this idea that people marry for various reasons and is posing the question, are you marrying for the right reason? And then it talks about there's some basic needs that people marry for. Companionship, family, companionship is one reason, family is another reason. And to acquire a legit means or a legitimate path to express themselves physiologically, meaning sexually and emotionally. And it leaves it at that. I was very disappointed in that regard. And I was very disappointed with the idea of beginning the section with the hadith that's just saying that a woman is normally sought for because of her wealth, her beauty, her family background, or deen. I kind of felt that what is missing is a more holistic view of why people marry aside from those reasons. That's not to say that that hadith is not a point of guidance for us in this, but the way that we're using the hadith, it has to be properly framed out. Now, I like how the book initiated in the sense that the book talked about وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. And so Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is saying that from the signs, from his signs, subhanAllah, are that he created from the same origin companions, right? People that are compatible with us, our pairs, so that we can exist with them in tranquility, and then Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala placed between us love and mercy. And so although the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ says a woman is normally sought as a wife for her wealth, beauty, family background, and deen, and then he mentioned choosing deen is to be the utmost choice, and that will allow us to prosper. In other words, look at her values. Look at what she believes. Look at her values. We have to put that hadith in the proper frame of what is marriage, and then where is it that we fit in that context of marriage. That's important to connect the dots in that regard. It's one thing to look at marriage in the general sense, and it's another thing to know why we as individuals are marrying. And what it is that we as individuals, as human beings, in other words, get out of marriage. Because after all, the ayah of the Quran says that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala يعني خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. That Allah created from the same origin as ourselves other human beings that we can find compatibility with, and with them we can live in tranquility. And so then the human dimension is brought up. And once the human dimension is brought up, the human being is a complicated being. There's ideas, there's emotions, there's instincts, so on and so forth. And so when we talk about basic needs, I rather look at what some of the psychology literature, especially Maslow's hierarchy of needs, points to. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a way of looking at human behavior, what it is that human beings are looking after, what it is that they need at a basic level. So it's just a way, a frame of looking at that. And we know that the objectives of the Sharia are to preserve life, are to preserve human dignity, are to preserve the human intellect, are to preserve the wealth of the human being, are to preserve our family life, to preserve the deen itself for our values. The deen is there to preserve our values, our belief system, our family, our wealth, our intellect, our dignity, our life. So the Sharia is legislated in that way, or the deen itself teaches in a way that makes securing those realities life, the dignity of that life, the ability of a person to think, the freedom to think, the wealth of that individual so that they're stable, the family life itself, it guides us how to build family, and it sets principles of how to understand and teach the deen so that we can practice in such a way that our lives are pleasing to Allah. The deen has those necessities in place. Those are called dururiyat. Those are fundamentals, essentials, foundational realities that Islam is aiming at. Preservation of life, the dignity of that life, preservation of our minds, so that we're free to think and make decisions clearly, preservation of wealth, preservation of family, which stabilizes the ummah and the community, and preservation of our values overall. And so those are things that we should be looking to marriage for. Marriage, yes, is about preservation of the ummah overall, but within that, we should be looking at the fact that life is sacred, that life is dignified, right? And that a human being has the freedom to think and share ideas and communicate and make decisions together, right? That's the whole idea of having an intellectual life, right? That's the whole idea of the life of the intellect. So the objectives of the Sharia, they guide us in truly understanding the institution of marriage. That's important. But when we look at the psychological level, there's some things that are foundational that we can also say marriage should preserve these things. At the basic level, our physiological needs, although our physiological needs include things like air and water, but when it comes to food, shelter, right, clothing, and our ability to reproduce ourselves, which now we're talking about the sexual reality. That's at the those are needs that we find that are safeguarded in the marriage. That are the marriage. That's a fundamental reality of marriage, just as is a fundamental reality of life. Human being has that need. Well, marriage facilitates the idea of reproduction, but reproduction is not the only reason why we get married, right? We have a need for these things as human beings. But what makes it different in the idea of marriage is that in the idea of marriage, we're responsible not only for ourselves, but for our partners. And so the idea of sustenance, the idea of being able to sleep and feel secure, because safety needs are there as well. The sense of being safe. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have physiological needs and we have safety needs. First, in order to establish life, we need water, food, shelter. We need to be able to be at peace enough to be able to sleep and be able to feel secure, that we need clothing to protect ourselves. And then in the context of marriage, that institution allows us to express ourselves sexually. But we're not only looking to meet our physiological needs in marriage, also there has to be safety, and I'm pointing to this. And part of that safety is a sense of security, a sense of not being harmed. And that's what we talked about, the whole issue of the Sharia upholds the dignity of the human being. Well, in marriage, part of upholding the dignity is that we feel safe in that relationship. We feel secure. Part of upholding the dignity is that the economics of that relationship is also an economics which allows us to live somewhat of a dignified life, even if it's a simple life. Part of our safety needs is that our health is not at risk, right? And part of our safety needs in the context of marriage is that we're secure from the abuse of each other. And that brings us to other things like the need for feeling loved and belonging, and the need for esteem. When we talk about love and belonging, we talk about the necessity that we have for friendship as human beings. We have that as individuals. We need friendship. We need intimacy. We need family, a sense of connection. We need to be recognized, right? We need to have a sense of self-regard for ourselves, and that we experience respect from others, and a sense of freedom. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, one of the needs that the human being has when those things are established is the desire to become the best person that you can be, to grow, in other words. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is telling us that at the individual level, we have a need to ensure that we can exist. So we need to be able to take care of our existence. And then we have a need not only to exist, but to feel safe and secure. And not only to feel safe and secure, but to feel loved and have a sense of belonging. But not only that, to have a sense of respect and regard, right? And then we can begin to grow. So in the marriage, Islamically, we find that the preservation of the marriage or the family, when we talk about the objective of the Sharia, it's not going to take place unless these things are in place. Unless we have our physiological needs met, our safety needs met. There's a sense of love and belonging, and there's a sense of esteem, and there's the idea of becoming better, or what we will call in Islamic language ihsan. And so Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala tells us, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مُوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, that Allah placed between the male and the female love and mercy. And so how can love and mercy exist without that basic of لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, which is that sense of feeling secure and at peace, tranquility. And that becomes more detailed out when we look at the psychological needs of the human being. So life has to be secure. That's an objective of the Sharia. We have to be able to exist. We have to be able to live. That's why there's this economic demand for certain things to be put in place economically in order to build marriage, because we're talking about sustaining life. But we're not just talking about materialism here. We're not just talking about having money or having wealth. We're talking about having wealth for a particular purpose, which is that which was mentioned to sustain life. And then we're talking about also the need to ensure that we have an understanding that marriage, what we should want out of marriage, is not only to secure our existence, but to have a dignified life, that we're with a partner that regards our dignity, respects our dignity. Not only that, that our minds have the ability to operate. We have the ability to think and contribute. We have the ability to understand and to be consulted. Amruhum shura bainahum. The Quran says that shura is a characteristic of the ummah, and we were commanded shawarahum fil amr. And there's a number of other ayat which indicate to the reality of consultation as being a characteristic of the ummah. So if that is the case, then shura is something which is embedded in the family. So what we should be wanting out of marriage is to secure our existence, to have that our dignity is regarded, and that we can exercise our intellect to implement shura, that we are consulted and we develop our minds and exercise our minds in such a way that we can come to agreements, that we can be understood, that we have a feeling of regard and respect. People are regarding and respecting us in that relationship. If that's not there, then the relationship becomes a sense where I'm an object. I'm just there to provide, or I'm just there to cook, clean, those stereotypic ideals that people have of marriage. So when we talk about the objective of the Sharia, Hifdul Deen, and when we look at the Prophet ﷺ, what he's saying that, marry a woman for a deen, the values is what is being pointed out to. The values of understanding what is marriage all about, not just what I want from marriage. But if we're going to talk about marrying for the right reasons, then we have to also understand what it is that the philosophy of deen is. What is the way that deen understands life and relationships? And specifically marriage itself. My relationship to myself and my relationship to other people. So it's not just the issue that marriage is just to fulfill the concept of companionship and to establish a family, and that it's a legitimate means to express emotion and sex. No, much more than that. On the psychological level, on the material level, on the spiritual level, on the growth level, there's certain things that need to be put in place in order for us to really comprehend what marriage is. If not, what happens is that the idea of hifdul usra, or the preservation of the family, becomes just an idea. It doesn't become a reality. And so if there's no preservation of the family intact, if the family relationship is not preserved, then what that means is that the ummah is breaking down. What that means is that we didn't understand what marriage was about when we went in. And so what happened is that certain things were not in place. If we can't preserve the family, certain things were not in place that are leading to the destruction of the relationship. So we have to know first, before we talk about our own personal reasons, what is it that Islam and what is it that we as human beings need in a healthy relationship? Then we can say, well, I want this type of relationship on top. But these things have to be in place. It can't just be that, yes, Islam allows me to marry for beauty, and then because it's halal, I'm married for beauty. Yes, Islam allows me to marry for wealth or a green card or whatever, and I'm married for those things. Because when it comes to that, or I want to be part of this family because this family is known, and if we're married for those reasons, at the end of the day, that doesn't guarantee the preservation of the family. It doesn't guarantee the preservation of human dignity. It doesn't guarantee our ability to exercise our intellect. And we want to guarantee those things. We want to be able to have that sense of dignity and freedom. We want to be valued and esteemed. We need that in order to flourish. We won't be able to get to the point of growing as human beings or growing as a couple, more importantly in the context of marriage, if we don't have certain things in place to stabilize life and things that make us feel secure, and that experience of love and belonging, that experience of respect and esteem, so we can grow. That's why a lot of people, when they get married, they have the potential to be power couples, but they end up being enemies. And they end up missing the opportunity to be the greatest couple and the greatest individuals that they can be, because Islam is calling us to the issue of ihsan, or to be excellent, to be refined, to grow, to be people that are continuously striving to do better and be better and experience better. That's an important point, people, that we have to understand. People today, they question marriage due to their experience of what they have seen or what they have lived, because of what they have seen of violence, abuse, because of the prejudice of the genders, because of a lack of joy, or sometimes because their basic needs, the need for love, the need for sexual expression, the need for emotion and affection, that's not met. Or their economic situation is so bad that it's not met, right? Or there's just no values of Islam that are being practiced outside of these that were mentioned, like the issue of salah, the issue of dua, the issue of staying away from the haram. These things are not in place. And so people begin to mistrust marriage. That's why we want to start off with, well, what is the basics for a healthy relationship? Unfortunately, a lot of times this is not the conversation that we have. And so the deen does point to it, but we need to highlight it. And psychology, to a certain extent, does help us as a discipline. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is helping us, and we can find overlaps between it, or connections between it, and what it is that the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah is teaching us, right? And so we find that people, they question marriage because of their experiences or what they think, or the damaged relationships that are around them don't seem to help them. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, then, if we want to prepare for marriage, if we were married before, the book in this chapter, it deals with why do people get married? And they say, for preserving their chastity, for companionship, for the construction of a family, for financial security, for escaping, for settling down, because they have false hopes and dreams, because they have feelings of obligation to be married, or guilt, because they want to care for a widow or orphan, or because they want to enter into polygamy. Those are about 9 reasons that the book is mentioning why people get married, right? And then it goes into the whole idea of the types of people that are seeking marriage: people that are single with no experience, people that are single with experience, people that have been divorced, people that have been divorced with children, with no children, people that are widowed, people that are seeking more than one marriage. You have these characteristics, and then you have reasons. You have these types of people that are seeking marriage, and then you have reasons why people are seeking marriage. So it's important for us to be able to understand what the human being needs and what a healthy relationship is, and then to determine why is it that people are getting married. What is the specific reasons people are getting married? And these are 9 reasons that people get married for. And when we can understand these 9 reasons, we can begin to determine whether people are getting married for the right things, or if there's a deficiency in their understanding. But we have to realize, and I want to close with this, we have to realize that in order to prevent unhappiness to a great extent, we're not always going to be happy, but to a great extent, in order to prevent violence and abuse, in order to go into marriage where we can grow, we have to understand what human needs are. And the basic human need is that life is sustained, and that people have a dignified life, and that people feel secure. That's a really basic level. On top of that, people have a need to be loved, a sense of belonging in that relationship. They have a need for esteem, respect, to be recognized, to be heard, and they have a need to grow. That's a human need. A relationship has to provide those things. Whether the husband and wife work on those things as a team, like the basic needs, or whether one person has more wealth than the other one and they contribute to that, the basics have to be in place. But together, the couple, we're talking about the basics materially, but together the couple has to move towards making sure each person feels secure with them, that their safety needs are met, that they love each other and they give each other a sense of belonging, that they esteem each other, and that they encourage each other to grow. That's the foundational stuff that we should be getting out of a marriage. And part of growth is not just growth in my career, or it's not just growth in the amount of things that we have, but it's growth also in our relationship with Allah. It's growth with myself personally, that I have someone that encourages me to be the best person that I can be. Right? And so the book, when it talked about basic needs, it just talked about people going to marriage for companionship, family, and having a legit means to exercise sex and emotion. But to me, that's very limited. Maslow's hierarchy of needs helps us a lot, and they overlap. These needs overlap with the objectives of the Sharia. So marriage should be the preservation of life. It should be the preservation of dignity, the preservation of intellect, the preservation of wealth, the preservation of the family relation itself, and a means to preserve our deen. When those things are in place, when we know that marriage is the institution which helps us to preserve those things, and we go deeper on a psychological level to say that marriage is that which helps us to secure our physiological needs, our safety needs, our need for love and belonging, our need for esteem, and our need for self-actualization, then we're ready to talk about individual reasons why people get married. Right? But people have to understand what human needs are, and they have to understand how it is that marriage should meet those human needs. Because if those needs are not met, then the foundation is not in place. You can't ignore human needs. Right. And so we'll continue with this chapter, and we'll go into a lot more details, but I just want to lay out that framework first of what should we be looking for on a psychological level as individuals and as a couple in a marriage. What should we be looking for in the marriage as far as the objectives of the deen? What are the primary Islamic teachings which have to be put in place? Right. And we mentioned that the objectives of the Sharia, or the goals of the Sharia, or the goals of Deen overall, should be preserved in the marriage. And we said, like, for instance, the preservation of life means that there should be no violence or physical abuse, because the preservation of life is also coupled by the preservation of dignity. There should be no compulsion in the marriage. There should be consultation. That's the preservation of intellect. There should be preservation of wealth. That means that wealth is an important factor, that marriage should be that which is allowing growth. It's not just a place where money is just being spent, right? And it's not a place where poverty dominates, and it's not a place where people are so focused on the spiritual that they neglect their basic needs. And that relationship is a relationship which each person's actions contributes to the preservation of the marriage itself. Not that one person is sabotaging the relationship or two people are sabotaging the relationship. Right? That's what marriage is about, that we're working together to preserve our relationship. And ultimately, that marriage is a place in which we can work together to preserve our deen, which our deen is calling us to preserve all of those other things. Right? And our deen is calling us not only to preserve all of those things that were mentioned, preservation of life, human dignity, intellect, wealth, and the family relation itself, but our deen is calling us to preserve our souls. And we can't preserve our souls if we also don't know what it is that we need at the psychological, emotional level. And we mentioned that we have things like the need for safety, love, and belonging, to be respected and regarded and esteemed, and the need to grow, as part of our needs. And so when we look at all of these things together, marriage is that space in which life itself can flourish, and our life as Muslims is what guides that flourishing. Assalamu alaikum.